Thank you. And I want to talk about the review of electricity market arrangements, otherwise affectionately known as REMA. But I just wanted to just ask Ms. Raw one question on hydrogen. And that was simply, and I'm thinking particularly with your fund management background with this question, what do you think the economic opportunity is for the UK if we get this right? How significant is it on hydrogen?
Well, it could be very significant for two reasons. One, the ability to export the expertise. So from a UK PLC perspective, to be able to apply the learnings from the UK and apply them globally, you could, effectively grow business exponentially, because the thing about green hydrogen in particular is it's very scalable. You're able to then scale hydrogen globally, and particularly where your resources, so your sun and your wind, are able to do that. So that's point one. Point two is then the ability to export hydrogen. Now, our competitive position relative to other countries, we'd need to weigh that up, but that very much is defined by policy, defined by pace. And also when you look at offshore wind, I think that there's that sort of trite phrase with the Saudi Arabia of wind. We could actually be able to grow that capacity fast and therefore be able to accelerate and be ahead of the game versus solar green hydrogen, for example, in Africa or Middle East. So those would be the two ways that you could really benefit, the UK could benefit from the hydrogen economy.
Great. Thank you. It's very good to hear the Saudi Arabia of wind phrase again. We've missed it in these halls. On REMA, and this is first of all to you, Ms. Raw, again, but I'd like comments from others on this particular point. What outcomes do you think are required from REMA to ensure that investment support schemes, such as the capacity market, bring forward the optimal technology mix at a cost that is viable or affordable?
So to sort of reinforce the point you've just made, market reform is required in order to be able to prepare us for a renewables-led system, which our current system isn't designed for. So that just reinforces what you said. In order to be able to create this low-carbon, renewables-led energy system, we need a market that reflects that. So there are three things that I would sort of focus on in terms of delivering that. The first would be around non-flex low-carbon generation, and what I mean by that is renewables, but it covers multiple forms of renewables. And really, how do you provide investment certainty over time? And so from our perspective, it would be rolling out and extending the CFD structure that exists today. And that can be voluntary. But in terms of a lot of the discussions that went into the levy, actually being able to disconnect renewables from the gas market and be able to deliver that investment certainty over time, that's where the CFD benefits. The second thing would be the capacity mechanism. And so really that's around how do you design it in such a way that it supports low carbon alternatives. So at the moment, the way the system is working for CCS, for example, and for hydrogen, is that we would sit outside of the capacity mechanism, through a dispatchable power agreement. But when you look at potentially peaker power, OCGTs powered by hydrogen rather than gas, then they would be selling into the capacity mechanism. And so what you need to ensure is that the mechanism is designed that they would be preferred to unabated gas. And so if you don't have hydrogen at a cost competitive level yet relative to gas, how would you do that? So that's a fundamental issue. The third largest one is around really how do you keep the cost of capital as low as possible to deliver the £350 billion, which is what SSE estimates, of capital that is required to deliver net zero. That's fundamentally when you step back and you say, what does REMA need to deliver? And it needs to deliver a structure that allows that investment to take place at as low a cost of capital as possible.
Right. Any of the other witnesses have any comments that are differing to that or in addition?
Just to say that going beyond...
Don't worry about the bells.
Going beyond the energy market reform, there's a lot of other blockages. There's a real blockage in planning. the time it takes to get a wind farm from entering the pipeline all the way to being deployed is just far too long. So there needs to be some kind of way that making that more efficient. And there's also again, outside the market, the issue of transmission and making sure that if all this power is going to be being produced in the north and the population centres are big population centres in the south, like making sure that there's that transmission can get the electricity to where it's needed. So those are two really key things that kind of sit outside the electricity market reform and haven't been addressed yet.
Just to go back to the market reform, think tanks, in particular Onward, but I'm sure others have as well, argue that, so in effect the government's created bespoke support schemes for CCS and hydrogen. Certain think tanks have argued that by limiting competition between these technologies, the government risks procuring a sort of weird mix of technologies and therefore making itself vulnerable to lots of lobbying for lots of different people trying to get their technology to be the number one. Therefore, perhaps the government should just have one single mechanism, which is a sort of one-size-fits-all to limit that. Do you think that makes sense?
I'd kind of argue the counter that with the example of things like offshore wind, you do have to, at some point you have to pick winners, and it might be expensive to begin with, but you do have to test them forward. It's very difficult to design a model that can support both these two very different technologies, which have very different, particularly in the way they're transported and stored. Very difficult to design one single thing that would equally boost them.
So it's clearly a very different energy system than we've had previously, and underpinning it has got to be the renewables. But that puts requirements on the system around flexibility and stability that maybe haven't been there in the past, and that needs to be a key output of whatever is the energy design process. And I think transport of energy, be that via electrons or hydrogen or gas, is an important part of that as we move energy around the country, because a lot of the energy is not where we need it as consumers, and that's going to be important cost input into getting to the lowest, most reliable, flexible system.
Just to finish off, Ms. Powers, you've been admirably restrained. Anything you'd like to add or comment on?
I don't think so beyond really what's already been said, but I think to look at the future power system needs to be looked at as a whole, and back to the role of power CCS, and we need to consider the reductions, so the reductions in network reinforcements, the reducing the overall balancing costs as a result of scaling up the proportion of renewables on the system. That when we look at the whole package, we consider the role that each of these technologies is going to play.
Okay.